this is all working. We both look beautiful, so everything's fine. We can be heard, we can be seen, and let's see what's happening on a deeper level. So, everybody, namaste, namaste, namaste. We meet again with this beautiful lady sitting here, Dr. Joanna Kujawa. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Kujawa, but that's okay.
Kujawa.
Nobody
Kujawa.
pronounces it properly.
I love it. Is it Japanese? What is it?
No, everybody thinks it's Japanese, but I'm actually originally Polish. So it's a Polish last name. It's a region in Poland that is called.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
wow. How fascinating. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. You've already discovered where Joanna is from. And just as a point of intention, deep dialogues, everybody, is about a dialogue exchange. It's not an interview, and it's not certainly an opportunity for me to ask a question and to sit here looking rather spacious. It's actually a conversation, it's a dialogue, so that we can both share the mutuality and the concurrence of what our beliefs are, what our attitudes are. And as you know, Deep Dialogues is a platform for bringing global soul stewards to this particular point of conversation, to this dialogue, to share with us values, beliefs, technologies that are useful to us as we create a brand new world. And so that's the substance of it all. So bear with us because you will find me interrupting, and Joanna may also interrupt me for a deeper purpose, for a more essential meaning, if that is necessary. So, who is Dr. Joanna? Well, Joanna is a scholar, a spiritual detective, and an author. She has just published an extraordinary book called Alien Goddess, UFOs, AI, and the Goddesses of Ascension, but has also written The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge. So, this book about Alien Goddess, could you give us a very, very brief and charming introduction to Alien Goddess? Fascinating.
Mm. So perhaps I will start with the origin of a book because I didn't intend to write another book after The Other Goddess. And then I was confronted with something that shocked me. So I was confronted by another book by somebody that I really admire, who writes about UFOs, Dr. Diana Pasulka. And in one interviewee in her book was talking about artificial intelligence and about transhumanism and posthumanism. And for the first time in my life, I had a feeling that I encountered something that is alien, but not alien how in the sense of ET, but something that was, I personally thought that I encountered an evil. So that was something very unusual for me because until then I didn't believe it existed, basically. I thought it's a form of ignorance and so on. And I had to somehow resolve this for myself, because I don't see myself as a person like that. And I thought, why was I confronted so much with these ideas of transhumanism and posthumanism? Would you like me to just explain very briefly what I
Yeah, what
what
your perspective is, that would be
yeah,
wonderful
yeah,
for our listeners.
yes. So, first of all, I've never really thought about it previously, but transhumanism basically argues that we can transfer human consciousness into a robotic body. And that struck me as absolutely wrong. I didn't even understand it intellectually, but on a heart level, even on a soul level, especially on a soul level, I felt like my soul was crushed. I felt sudden. It was the first time in my life that I felt that my soul was crushed. And then I was exposed through the same book into the idea of posthumanism, where they actually argue, this woman argues, not Diana Pasuka, but the person that she interviews in her book, that actually artificial intelligence and robotic bodies would be so much more advanced than humanity that humanity should step aside and go extinct, actually. Because somebody smarter, I want to talk about intellectualism, right? Smarter should take place because we are not the smartest species on the planet. And then I think because I work as an academic, and I'm very much in my head, much more than I would like to be for professional reasons. And this was the first time truly that I was connected 100% to my soul and to my heart.
Mm,
Suddenly, I
mm,
felt that this is wrong on very soul level, right? On existential level, but on a spiritual level, right? So I wrote this book because I had to figure it out for myself, what's going on, right?
mm,
So I was looking into I was thinking about what consciousness is, but not in an intellectual way. I was thinking that artificial intelligence, how we perceive it nowadays, goes in the up it actually reached the end of what I called masculine intelligence,
mm,
like
mm,
animus in Jung.
mm,
And nothing against masculine. I love men. I have a partner, a masculine partner, and I think it's very sexy and all of that. However, if you take this kind of form of intelligence into its dead, what I believe is a dead end, this is where we end up with artificial intelligence,
mm,
right? Heartless, just smart. And then I realized that what really is missing, and it was either we have forgotten this or what was never really tried, is actually what I call goddess consciousness, which
mm,
is this more
mm,
heart, soul-oriented intelligence, which is much more intuitive.
mm,
So that's why I'm talking about in the third part of the book of the goddesses of ascension, because I started to look into ancient myths of some goddesses that I know you interested. I listened to some of your interviews in Goddess Hathor and so on, that there's actually a lineage of goddesses that were pushing humanity in a different direction than what is going on right now.
mm,
But somehow this tradition of goddesses and priestesses was always silenced or pushed into like esoteric, into the margins, esoteric margins of each religion and system beliefs. And this other form of consciousness, the masculine form of consciousness, took over. And it has its positive sides. Technology can be a wonderful thing. Like we would not have met without technology, right?
yeah, yeah.
We would not be able to have this conversation without this technology. But if we take it to the limit without some impact of the feminine form of consciousness or goddess consciousness, then we end up with this kind of deadly artificial intelligence and ideologies behind them, like, we should actually step aside because the robots will be smarter.
Mm. Bearing
And
in
I,
mind, yeah,
Mhm.
sorry, yeah, carry on.
And then it's just very briefly, and then I started to wonder, did these goddesses actually show up sometimes, or maybe some messengers, and this is your specialty,
Yeah,
show up in liminal spaces, such
yes.
as I believe that UFOs primarily, although not only, belong to liminal spaces, right? They're interdimensional beings in my experience and in my research, but also not only necessarily. And so I started to look into Marian apparitions and the Fatima event in Portugal in
Mm,
1916 and 17 and so on.
mm.
So this is kind of a
This is
short
this is a
description.
fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And so I'm intrigued by 2 points. One being, what did you discover about the person who had been interviewed within the book that was talking about this substantive reality of humans need to step aside and AI needs to take over? What did you discover about her particular personality or her philosophy or the way that she was thinking? Why did she feel it was necessary for humanity to step aside? Was it purely based on the rather catastrophic decisions that are being made in our governing systems throughout the world, or what?
This person, we don't know her real name because all of the interviewees are, use pen names. However, so I don't know who she really is, but I know that she's a scientist, that she's a space scientist, as far as I know, and that she actually genuinely believes that this is the most wonderful thing that could possibly happen. And so this was an interesting discovery for me because I also realized that just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you actually carry the goddess energy, what I say, or that you're connected to the divine feminine. Not at all. Because in my estimation, this particular person is uh, completely overtaken by this other paradigm, the masculine form of consciousness, and actually believes that it is a saving grace for humanity. And it
Mm,
is wonderful that we surrender to species that are even more intelligent than are, because it is all about intelligence, but not a higher intelligence in a spiritual sense that all spiritual traditions have. Like in Hinduism, it is the Buddhi, it is grace or intellection. Even in Christianity, every tradition has something that talks about this other form of consciousness. She was speaking strictly from a very scientific, materialistic point
mm,
of view. And then
mm,
I started to look into definitions of science, and they're all really like it has to be in the lab, it has to be material, it has to be tactile. And I realized, apart from, some modern physics and so on, this modern science is still very limited, and they do not take into consideration the most important events of our lives as spiritual experiences.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, fascinating. So what I would refer to as being an intellectual tyranny, that the conceit of the intellect takes over from any of the feeling impulses that are happening within the human experience.
That's
And
right.
also, really ignoring the substance of the birthplace and the birth rendering of Western enlightenment, which is based on the sanctity of the
Mm,
individual. And it
mm,
seems, it seems that many people are now stepping forward. The freedom revolutionaries are stepping forward to support the statement of really what the principles or the tenets of Western Enlightenment is all about. Because we
mm,
see from a socio-political point of view that our world, the Western world, is being taken over by a force that is essentially evil.
I
What did you,
absolutely
what did
agree.
what did you discover in your exploration of this energy that you referred to as evil? Because it's fascinating that in the beauty of your innocence, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, whoa, there is a force that is this, which evidently is not something that you encountered in your life up to that point. What did you discover evil is?
So I'm still processing all of this. So I think that in some sense it is, so I have two theories. One of them is radical, one is kind of nice. So I'll start with with a nice theory. So it is that in a sense, it's still a form of ignorance, this particular evil, because not knowing about, having any idea about the wisdom of the heart, having no idea of the existence of the soul or the experience of the soul, you probably would assume this is wonderful. Look, you can have this robotic body. You can be a babe forever, right? You can live forever.
Mm,
And when I started to look theologically into it, into evil, and the soul. And it's quite interesting that according to most of theologies of all religions, you cannot lose your soul. You have to give it up freely. And this is when my second theory comes. If I have to give up freely, my soul freely, it means that somebody benefits from this.
mm,
Right? Somebody wants to feed on our souls, and they want to convince us that is actually for our benefit. Like we are going to have these beautiful robotic bodies and we are going to live forever. but we are going to be soulless. But it makes no sense unless somebody benefits from this. And because I'm also a student of Gnosticism, which
Mm,
is, I'm sure your listeners and viewers of your videos are aware of it, it
mm,
is a
mm,
form of esoteric form of spirituality, which argues that there is a struggle between good and evil
mm,
in the world.
mm,
Many things, right? Gnosticism is about many things, but one of them is about that. And then I realized, started to look into Gnostic sources like Pistis Sophia, which is about goddess Sophia, which is in the third part of my book. And I started to dissect this and look, what does this work really teach us, I'm sorry. And then I realized that they're actually talking about these evil powers, right?
mm,
That want to create chaos in our world, and they want to feed on our fear, and they want to feed on this chaos.
mm,
So then I realized many of these ideologies about behind artificial intelligence, I'm not talking against artificial intelligence, but ideologies that promote it,
mm,
is that they are not so innocent. It's may
mm,
perhaps not just ignorance, that somebody is consciously introducing this temptation, so to speak, for
mm,
us. And in my estimation, just because I'm interested in it, the I don't want to use a word like salvation, but the tool of ascension or the redemption in a way lies in another form of consciousness, which I don't believe we fully explored, or if we did, we forgot. You would know better because you're connected with Atlantis. And this is what I call, divine feminine or goddess consciousness, which is more intuitive, which is more holistic, has more connectivity with everything, and
mm,
which is very much more difficult to describe because it is not the rational minded, logical form of consciousness, but it
mm,
is this more subtle, more beautiful, more sensual also form of consciousness and more natural in a sense. I believe that all natural world is part of this divine consciousness of what I call divine consciousness.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we see that the tyranny of the intellect is taking over simply because it delves into the quantitative nature
Mm,
of the universe and we as universal beings and the way that we function, as opposed to the qualitative of really feeling the quality of what the
mm,
totality of human consciousness is all about, in all of its joy, in all of its delight, in all of its thrill, but also in all of its confusion, in all of its catastrophic and all of its
yes.
tragedy, of seeing a much more holistic approach. And of course, that this is one of the principles that really is the inspiration within the context that I gather of the arousal of the divine feminine at this moment, that the goddess is a great believer in unity consciousness, a great believer in the fact that feeling is the language of the soul. And in order
Mm,
to become the extraordinary beings that we could become, of moving back into the wholeness of what universal splendor is all about, is if we can really move in the direction of understanding and of also, one of my despairs within
mm,
the community that we're part of, the human potential community, is that many of our colleagues engage in fascinating theorem, fascinating opinionation, but rarely refer to the sacred and the divine, that there is actually a decree within universal splendor, within universal intelligence, that many of our star brothers and sisters live through, of recognizing that this planet we're living on is the only planet of choice. So there is this decree of understanding and of respecting in a profound way free will, so that
mm.
we all have a
Absolutely.
choice of being able to decide, well, do I go towards the dark or do I go towards the light?
Mm.
For me, the darkness that I see in all the varying ways that I see it, because as well as working within this community, I work in the public service of working with world leaders. And so I've been employed by the UN on occasion to go into war-torn areas such as Ukraine or Gaza to run
Mm.
workshops that are healing workshops with their
Oh,
aid
beautiful.
workers, who are often so challenged by the amount of suffering that they
Mm.
see that they experience huge what we call PTSD.
Yeah.
In fact, on one particular occasion, of the 45 people that I was dealing with, well, they were all terminally constipated because they
Mm.
were producing so much hyperadrenalization to keep going in dealing
Yes.
with all the suffering that actually they were staunching all of the intestinal tract within their own bodies. And the kidneys were hyperactive with adrenaline. And of course, we
Yeah.
know that when we produce so much cortisol and noradrenaline, the first thing that happens is the entire intestinal tract begins to dry up. The good thing is that through the work that we were doing, I now know that they're all pooing. So they're moving away from.
Excellent. Well done.
However,
Well done.
there, in those situations, I see the level of choice that has been made by the malevolent force to
Mm.
control, manipulate, and coerce, often in violent ways. And this
Yes.
is what I see to be, as we were saying, the manifestation of what darkness or evil is all about. But at the same
Yes.
time, we're both very intelligent people, so we know that we're looking at the possibility of light and darkness working together so that we can
Mm.
bring everything back into a healing. Healing is a movement back to wholeness. Yeah,
Yes.
fascinating. And of course, I was also reminded of the great story at the beginning of the 17th century when we are dealing with a population in Europe who are obviously illiterate. There very few people read at that time. And of
Mm.
course, if we don't read, we experience consciousness on an elemental level in a very different way because we're not cluttered by the images of the hieroglyphs of the page. And so, the belief, because I'm a scholar within Shakespeare and have taught that for many, many years within the acting profession, and was the master of voice at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, which was a reconstruction of the theatre
Mm.
that would have been there for the 37 plays of Shakespeare in 1597. We know that the people of that time believed totally in the anima mundi, in the animating principle of the universe, which of course is the feminine. So
Absolutely.
if they felt unwell or out of sorts, the first thing that they would do would be to go into nature, where they would petition, praise, and participate, often around an earth node, a holy spring, or a statue of Mary, or a Celtic cross, or a yew tree, whatever it may be, or circle of standing stones. And through petition and praise and participation, they would automatically feel better. They would feel that their constitutions were renewed because they believed that the animating principle of the universe was God's breath. And God breathed onto the surface of the waters and brought forth life. And God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. So they were reconnected with the breath of soul, and this is what healed them. But then along
Mm.
came Isaac Newton that actually did not exist, that the Earth was merely a lump of matter hurtling through space. And so suddenly the feminine was desacralized.
Yes.
And it seems to me that what we're doing, what the wonder of your work, and let's come back to your exposition of the goddess, that what we're doing is we're returning to that level of balance. I see you nodding and agreeing with me, so you're very
Yes,
familiar.
absolutely. Absolutely. And when I was writing my other book, which is, The Other Goddess, I
Yeah.
actually discovered that there was this lineage of goddesses and priestesses from ancient times that try to teach humanity, that try to take humanity in a different direction through like sacred rites, but they were always demonized. They were always pushed on aside. So,
Yeah.
for example, Nimna, who is like a goddess from Sumer, and then Inanna, who is another incarnation, which became Ishtar, and Ishtar is quite sexy, so she had to be bad, like she's like the terrible goddess, which is actually also the same goddess as Hathor. That Hathor is very often portrayed as a divine mother, but she was very feminine. She was a very sensual. Her milk was a life-giving, alchemical liquid, right? So, and then she was transformed into Isis, which started to have even more magical powers. And actually, Isis started to introduce these rituals and so on. And then I connected Isis, and I'm not the only one, to, for example, Mary Magdalene, the lineage that also goes in this direction. And the only archetype of a goddess that whoever was trying to suppress it, and I think that somebody tried to suppress it because somebody, for two reasons. They knew how powerful it is, one reason, and they're somehow afraid of us. And another one is, and they're afraid of us for this reason as well, they didn't know how to control it because it's more like water, right? It's an energy. So, for example, in esoteric Hinduism, it's Shakti Kundalini. It comes to you, it awakes you, in a very sensual, beautiful way. It opens up the doors of perception for you. Like I had this kind of experience twice. So, but you cannot control it. I cannot say, okay, come to me now. No, this is this kind of playful relationship with this life energy, which is beautiful and which has always been here. So they didn't know how to control it, but they knew that it was very powerful. So that was scary for somebody, something that they knew is powerful and that it cannot be controlled. However, one archetype was never managed to be suppressed, and because it's the archetype of the Divine Mother. So again, Hathor, Isis, then was when Isis was transformed into a Black Madonna, and basically, the Holy Trinity or the Holy Family, actually, especially in Catholicism, is basically repetition of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, right? So, and Horus on the lap of Isis. So this, and in fact, Isis was so popular, which is another incarnation of Hathor that I know you like. It was so powerful that even although Christianity was made the state religion in the Roman Empire much earlier, people were worshipping Isis until the 5th century AD, or of Common Era. And then she was basically transformed into the Virgin Mary. Right. So she was there always kind of undercover. But even as a divine mother, as a Virgin Mary, I argued in the other goddess that this is not a full archetype of the feminine. It is also kind of a divine feminine that is kind of appropriated. So everybody feels comfortable with her. This kind of more magical aspects of her, of Isis, were taken away. The more sensual aspects of her, as Hathor, were taken away. So she was suddenly this kind of suffering mother, right? And I think this suffering mother was emphasized because there was this suffering masculine, which we have to honor as well, because very often women talk about patriarchy, but we forget that patriarchy sends young men to war,
Yes. Yes.
right? Patriarchy is not good for anybody. So this is the system, so to speak, right? Right. So this is the system actually. So they needed this kind of suffering, all-forgiving mother, so it can console the suffering masculine, which
Yeah.
is also completely overwhelmed by the weight of the world on their shoulders, right?
Yeah.
But so she was there kind of undercover, but not fully, not fully embodied in all her divine qualities of a divine feminine. She was made more polite, so to speak,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And you can see me nodding. I completely concur. It's absolutely fascinating. And it's ravishing to hear your take. It's wonderful to hear through your own exploration, through your own psychic or spiritual detective quality of being, how you've gone into this. So this actually, an illumination has come to me as you were speaking, that I'm fascinated by the phenomenon of Shakti, and
Mm-hmm.
particularly in relation to darling Diana,
Mm-hmm.
Diana who was Princess of Wales, that we know that when she passed, something happened in our world within the bodies of so many people. And the
Mm.
record suggests that it was in excess of 5.5 billion people wept,
Grieved. Yeah, I remember.
grieved.
Yeah.
And so again, we're going back into the quality of that we all need to heal our suffering. That we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing, that we get caught up in the neuroses of separation because of our suffering. And I don't wish to trifle that, that in my compassion, my service is to find ways of being able to encourage people who are experiencing gross suffering to move from suffering into salvation. But what's interesting about that phenomenon, and this is why I had to write the book, Diana really helped me write the book. But of course, Diana in spirit, she is still very with me. And
Mm.
I believe is within the pantheon of these wonderful faces that you're speaking of, these wonderful archetypes. Because what's
Mm.
interesting is they're really all one, but in our perceptual consciousness, we diversify them into their different identities. And we know that they all have a particular job, that they all have
Yes.
particular tool set. And that
Yeah.
this is the nature of the way that the archetypes work through us, that they're literally keys into our consciousness, whereby we can begin to see that the goddess is part of us, just as the god is part of us, that we move into our sovereignty. However, what I'm really going back to the phenomenon is that it seemed at that time that through startle reflex, everybody with the shock and then wept. But the
Mm-hmm.
out breath has not occurred.
Mm.
That people are still held in the rigor mortis almost, of that in breath, because we're still
Mm.
caught in suffering and we're not
Mm.
allowing that suffering to be elevated. Now, I feel intuitively, and I've been given information from these 12 angels that have been working with me for now 40 years, that we're about to experience a quality of supernatural healing that will be brought forth by the emanation of a blue lady, which I would suggest is Hathor or
Mm-hmm.
Venus or Aphrodite, the goddess of
Mm.
love, the goddess of dance, the
Mm.
goddess of childbirth, the goddess of the moon. That, of course, Diana, as in the goddess Diana, was
Yes.
associated with, and Diana was fascinated by the moon and was, Diana, the Princess of Wales, and was born under the sign of Cancer. So she was
Yeah.
always in the water. If she didn't swim 40 lengths a day, she felt mad.
Wow.
That
Oh.
it was a way of literally discharging any of the negative energy, because obviously we can see her in the way that we saw her as a hypersensitive realization of what the feminine is all about in human terms. Of course, she was branded as being neuroses and, full of neuroses and of being mad and thick as two short planks. Far from it. Her
Mm.
intelligence was not an intellectual rendering.
Mm.
It was an
Mm.
intuitive awareness.
Mm.
When she passed in the Pont d'Alma tunnel, in Roman times, that was the site of the Temple of Diana.
Wow. Really? Because I lived in Paris and know Paris very well, but I didn't know any history of Paris, but I didn't know this particular. This is a very interesting piece of information. Thank you. And Diana, of course, is also goddess Artemis, so in the Greek pantheon. And there are so many interesting things that you said. If I can just,
Yeah.
because I'm doing it as you speak about it, because I never thought about it this way. But I think that I remember the grief after Diana's uh, death,
Transition.
transition. It is, I think that because some people embody a particular, as you said, archetype of a divine feminine, and she embodied one. And she was this kind of a living goddess for lots of people, in this like as an embodiment of a divine feminine. And then when it was lost, I think people kind of felt the loss of this. They suddenly, I think we have a collective remembering that there was something beautiful like that. And we have it in our like DNA or in even soul memory, this divine feminine, and it's occasionally like Diana embodies that. And then when it is gone, we are traumatized again. I think we are traumatized because we realize it was there and then it's not there again, right? And it disappeared again. So if I can just a couple of things because now I'm rolling. Actually, when you said that she reminded you of goddess Aphrodite, it's quite interesting because goddess Aphrodite, there's this beautiful hymn. It's called Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, written in Homeric times in this particular verse, but it's obviously not written by Homer. It's just called because it's written in the same style, where Aphrodite is this powerful goddess, exactly like Hathor, this powerful, sensual goddess, and everybody's at her mercy, but she's very playful. She's not abusing her power. And as the time progresses, her powers are stripped from her. She suddenly, is completely at the mercy of Zeus, and she falls in love with with the wrong man, and actually mortal man, and it brings her down completely, and so on, right? So there is this kind of almost again memory of something very beautiful, very feminine that was lost, degraded, and lost. And I think that perhaps what people experience something like that with the passing of Princess Diana.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about archetypes, I first of all, I totally believe in archetypes of, divine masculine, divine feminine, and so on. And obviously, Carl Jung was extremely eloquent about it. But as I was writing these two books, We Have a Goddess and Alien Goddess, and especially when I was in Alien Goddess, I was talking about goddess Demeter and Persephone, the story of a mother and a daughter, but it's actually, I believe, a story of a lost consciousness, the feminine form of consciousness, of descending and so on. And then we get it on back partially, but as we are getting it partially, we just have this vague remembrance that we lost something. So all of us, I'm just digressing a little bit because I will talk about Demeter again. All of the myths of Demeter and Persephone, which is Eleusinian mysteries, of the descent of Inanna, of Mary Magdalene, of goddess Sophia and pistis Sophia, they actually tell exactly the same story, which is goddess consciousness, goddess descended,
Mm.
was stripped by
Mm.
false light,
Mm.
and she descended into the underworld.
Mm.
And once she was there, she was asked to be stripped of all her powers. She forgets who she is.
Mm.
But there's always one person. And I hope people in your community were always people. In Goddess, in Anna, for example, it was her faithful servant Ninshebur, who before Inanna descended, she said, "If I don't come back, you beat the drums and remind everybody about me so they don't forget about me." So, so the servant goes and, beats the drums. And so this is the memory. We have this, memory of the goddess consciousness that she descended and then eventually she comes back. But as she leaves the gates of the underworld, she's tricked again and she
Mm.
has to give up something that is really important for her so she
Mm.
can spend at least part of her time with us.
Mm.
So I think we are slowly regaining this consciousness, but I do believe it's a story of a loss of a consciousness of a divine feminine, of a different form of consciousness in all of this mythology. But what was interesting when I was reading the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which describes the same descent, it is very interesting because when you look at at Crete, Minoan culture, Knossos on Crete, right, which was matrilineal culture, which means succession was through women's line. They they worshipped titans and cyclones and goddesses before they were invaded by what we now call the ancient Greeks.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in the hymn of Demeter, she says she escaped from Crete. And then she came to teach people for Ulysses the ancient mysteries of the goddess. So this part of human consciousness is not forgotten. And you know
Yeah.
what is interesting? It is interesting that women be in the hymn, women actually meet the actual Demeter. So one day these goddesses did embody. Like I think that Demeter did embody actually. She was present on on Earth. She was present on our planet. She actually came from Crete, went to Ulysses, which is on mainland Greece, taught people the mysteries of the goddess, and so they wouldn't forget this part of consciousness. This, and then I learned that every great Greek and Roman philosopher was part of Eleusinian mysteries. They were all initiated. Plato, for example, Marcus Aurelius, Plotinus, great. So everybody that was anybody in the ancient world was initiated to these mysteries. Isn't it interesting?
Yeah,
But
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
and that she actually showed up in the city of Ulysses to teach humanity the mysteries
Yeah,
of the goddess. I think it's
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah.
There is something to it that's maybe more than just a story. I think that
Oh,
perhaps even a
absolutely,
physical
unquestionably.
presence.
And it is, to use the symbol that you mentioned in the narrative,
Mm,
it is the beating of the drum. The drum is
mm,
beaten to remind us of who we truly are rather than what we have become. And of course, the descent is so similar. There's a parallel, isn't there, between the long dark night of the soul, because we know
mm,
the only way to heal the long dark night of the soul, although we're crazed, it's a form
mm,
of spiritual madness, isn't it? That when we go through the long dark night of the
mm,
soul, the only way is to go down. The only way is to
mm.
go in. The only way
Go
is
in.
to
That's
lose
right.
all of the controls and of going in. And at the same time, we know that there are always guardians, there are always portal keepers that may be symbolic, may be allegorical, or they may be memories of very wise, loving people that we've had in our life experience, whether it be this life or prior life, that
Mm,
are always there at the doorway saying, you have more to do. Release this aspect and get whatever the aspect is, which is normally our conceit and our pride.
yeah.
Again, it's those
Attachment, some form of attachment to something.
attachments to what we think we are rather than who we
Mm,
truly are, which of course is extolled by the whole nature of what has taken place over the last 450 years in the
mm,
development of the male aspect of the ego in the intellect, of doing,
mm,
doing, 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 doing,
mm,
doing. And
mm.
most of the times we're not doing what we could be doing because they say so, whoever they may be, the memories of
Exactly.
our
Who
parents
are
or our teachers
they?
or peer pressure or whatever.
Yes.
So we cease being who we fundamentally are. This is fascinating. I've spoken with many leading individuals who are wonderful women who are, liberating their own consciousnesses, and because of the antic nature of their own intellects, that they're very gymnastic and very articulate in their thinking, that they've explored the varying substances of the myths of the divine goddess and all her
Mm,
varying forms in all the different cultural representations of it. And I haven't heard with impact what you are sharing.
mm. Thank you.
I feel you have a unique sharing here. And if I may, I feel that it's to do with the fact that although you have this ravishing intellect that asks really interesting questions of yourself and of the world and of all this data, that you feel it so deeply. and that it's arisen out of a very organic journey into, wait a minute, what does that mean?
Mm.
Why are they saying that? Rather
Yes.
than just simply dealing with received information that has been received from the recording of somebody else's writing.
Yes, so that's why, although I was concerned when we started this conversation, not to start it on a negative when I was talking about, what prompted me to write Alien Goddess, but I wanted to start it because it was really, you know, a feeling that
Yeah,
came from it didn't even come from the heart, it came from
yeah,
the soul. It's just like,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know, you
yeah,
gasp,
yeah,
you gasp,
yeah, yeah.
and this is that's why I really had to do this. And all of this beautiful esoteric traditions of the goddess tell us, and not only really, look within. And I always say ascension is a inner job,
Mhm. Yes,
right?
yes,
And
yes.
there's this beautiful fragment in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is a Gnostic work, right? And which also reminds me of higher magic of Isis. If I can just for a moment explain higher
Please
magic of
do.
Isis.
Yeah, please do.
Because there are two forms of magic, really. People think like black magic, white magic, but it's not actually that. I'm sure there is, but I'm talking about what people consider white magic, maybe.
Yeah,
But there's a natural magic, which basically there is a spell. You get something that you wanted, but you are losing something, right? Because it's something for something, right? Because
yeah,
this is how nature works.
yeah,
And higher magic is, which was called magic of Isis, of goddess Isis. It is when you actually rearrange the matrix, so to speak. So you correct, there's a correction on a higher level because something is not working, but not in a mechanical way. It is just,
yeah,
a correction
yeah,
in the creation, so to speak.
yeah.
And in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, there's this beautiful line almost at the end, which says, I left the world with the help of another world. A design was erased by the virtue of a higher design. So this is beautiful because this is exactly like the higher magic of Isis.
Mm,
Once we evolve, everything around us evolves.
mm, mm,
So when the whole design changes, because
mm,
in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, we talk about different levels of consciousness,
mm,
which are
mm,
delineated in Alien Goddess. So
mm,
by the time we are on a third level of consciousness, which is nous, N-O-U-S, which is the
mm,
liminal or imaginal space,
mm,
right? When we are connected to multidimensionality, and this is when we have, unusual events in our lives that can be considered unusual from a materialistic point of view, that
yeah,
this is exactly, the space from which, we grow, and once we evolve, everything with us evolves because our field of perception just went up or is much
yeah,
wider. And
yeah.
when we evolve, we take everything with us. Isn't
Mm,
it beautiful?
mm.
We are that important. We are very unique species. Even Carl Jung, in his Seven Sermons to the Dead, which is his Gnostic work, in the
Mm.
seventh sermon, he said that angels envy humanity because we are the doorway for the entire cosmos. Isn't it beautiful?
It's just exquisite, exquisite. Yeah, yeah.
We
And this
are
is,
the
and this is one of
doorway.
the reasons why, for example, manifestations like the supernatural power of angels is now, because the angels have been with me for all my life. But,
Yes.
specifically through divine transmission in 87, the harmonic convergence, when these 12 came to me, which incidentally, way back, when I first met them, I wanted to start teaching immediately. And Michael, Archangel Michael, said, You will not. We are going to prepare you because we need to prepare your vessel for the authenticity and the integrity
I love
of
it.
this
I
work.
love it.
And I
I
said,
love
oh, but I want, no, 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 you know.
it.
No. And I said, but what does this mean? You will see when the student is ready, the masters will come. And of course,
Mm,
the masters come as these inspirational moments that you were referring to, whether it's through one's own delineation of the eureka moment, or
yeah.
literally for me, walking through the plaza in Santa Fe, there was a Native American elder who turned to me and said, "You, I work with you." And I worked with them for 3 years. And the master claims they're very fierce wisdom. And the same thing happened to me years ago because I've been traveling through Egypt for 50 years and running retreats there. I should be running a retreat there in April for the arousal of the Blue Lady.
Fascinating.
There I was coming out of a particular area of the Valley of the Kings, and there is a Sufi elder who looked at me, and I recognized immediately and said, "You, I will work with you." And suddenly I relinquish, of course, because that aspect that you were sharing of something needs to be given, something needs to be relinquished to move into the consensual nature
Mm,
of elevation when we levitate into love, when we rise into love. And in all of those great depictions in the temples of Egypt, there is the god and there is the king or whomever, or another god, goddess.
mm,
And there is
mm,
always a giving and a receiving.
mm,
And in our
mm.
modern culture, we take, 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 take,
Okay.
take, rather than recognizing that linchpin, that is one of the most powerful master keys into our consciousness. So, this has been the most extraordinary conversation, and unfortunately, the time has rushed by. So, in a few moments, we will have to finish. But is there anything, I know this is a big question to ask, but is there anything, having shared what we've shared in this interlude, is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners about? By the way, everybody, we're recording this. Oh my goodness, what is the date today? It's the 19th of February, which is actually a
Mhm.
really interesting, that's 2026, by the way. It's a really interesting window astrologically because tomorrow is the great conjunction between Saturn and Neptune. If we see the Saturn as being Big Daddy, the karmic
Mm.
reaper, the patriarchal force, and Neptune as being the dreamer, bringing us from the deeps, from the depth rather. Is there anything specific that you would like to share with the listeners, the viewers?
Wow, that is a big question. But I would say, do not ever give up your soul. Always listen to the whisper of your soul. Do not give in to these temptations that are going to come our way, like within a month's time, maybe, a year maximum. Lots of people will be tempted by artificial intelligence, by robotic bodies, by the promises of eternity and eternal life. But actually, they do not offer anyone eternity. Even if they can transfer consciousness, it's only a mathematical, rational mind. And the beauty of our existence is actually in this other form of mind that Stewart is talking about, and also the divine feminine, the what I call goddess consciousness, the intuition, the connection with natural world, with with your own Shakti Kundalini, with your energy, divine energy. This is cannot be taken away from you. You can only give it up freely. So do not give it up freely because it will be pushed. I completely believe that this agenda is going to be pushed on us. So if you don't mind, can I finish with a little bit of goddess, sensual goddess mantra?
Please, yes, 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 yes,
So,
yes.
so it's a little tool, that we can connect. And then very often you can feel actually, energy moving, this beautiful energy moving through your body. And this is a beautiful mantra to this sensual goddess who rules the world. Om Lalita Tripura Sundari Soham. Om Lalita Tripura Sundari Soham. Om Lalita Tripura Sundari Soham. May the divine feminine be with you.
And so it is. Amen.